Welcome to Haunted Places. Story number 1. The Magic Castle. Hollywood, Magic, and the Occult. The rambling chateau-style mansion in the Hollywood Hills, known as the Magic Castle, which is a popular nighttime entertainment place, was built in 1909 as a private residence for real estate magnate Rollin B. Lane and his wife Catherine. Lane would die in the mansion in 1940, after which his widow Catherine left it to their son Rollin Jr. when she passed away in 1945. Large rambling mansions were not in style in the mid-1940s. They were relics of the Gilded Age, especially on the West Coast where the nouveau riche and Hollywood elite wanted to distance themselves from East Coast old money. So Rollins tried to sell the crumbling chateau, that is, Rollins Jr., but to no avail, and so he settled for turning it into a rooming house for students, struggling actors, and other creative types. Rollins' attempts to sell the decrepit mansion never ceased, though, and by the time he had rented it out to a dozen or so full-time residents, the strange noises that echoed from the bowels of the house and the ghostly phantoms residents swore they saw in the corners of their eyes late at night, plus the general, somewhat unearthly creaks and groans of the house, could not be ignored and drove potential buyers away. Rollins claimed these stories of ghosts, goblins, and otherworldly phenomena infecting the house were the inventions of the residents who wanted to continue enjoying cheap rent. However, that doesn't at all square with actual events. There was one female resident, only identified as Tish, an aspiring actress. She was often credited with these ghostly performances, whether they were to scare away prospective buyers or just for her own amusement at giving her fellow tenants the creeps. No one really knows, but no one really believes that she was responsible, especially when she herself disappeared. Apparently she would often go down into the deep, dank cellar of the house, and apparently, so Rollins claimed, once there made moaning sounds into the air ducts that would then reverberate through the house. But as I said, that account of people who actually lived there was always dismissed, most saying that the voices they heard were far too loud for one small woman to have created, and then for them to echo throughout the house. Moreover, the sounds often overlapped with each other. So unless Tish had modern audio equipment and a digital mixer in 1947, the idea is certainly ridiculous. But that begs the question, why was she a frequent visitor to the mansion's cellar? No one else ever wanted to venture down to investigate, even in broad daylight. And then when Tish disappeared, no one investigated that either. Some said she just moved out, and then others said that she went home, wherever that was. Truth was, aspiring starlets coming and going in post-war Los Angeles were a dime a dozen, and apparently no one gave it much thought. The ghostly wailings, though, didn't stop. Neither did the vague unease residents felt that they were constantly being watched. So, by 1948, most had left. But Rollins was saved when one Patricia Hogan leased the mansion and dubbed it Franklin Castle, named after the street on which the house is built on. She turned it into sort of an apartment building or long-stay hotel, very much along the lines of what Rollins himself was doing. But it didn't last long either. The mansion, to anyone that had spent any amount of time in it, was clearly haunted. By 1949, the mansion was vacant again, and falling further into disrepair, and remained vacant until 1955 when a local real estate developer, Thomas Glover, purchased the building. Then, rumor has it, he leased it out as an insane asylum. But what really happened in the Rollins Mansion between 1955 and 1961 is mostly unknown. And this is where we have to look at some of the wider history of Hollywood and Los Angeles. And by wider history, the sordid underbelly of Hollywood. Hollywood, remember, was created in order to get away from the Eastern establishment. In pre-World War I America, Thomas Edison held the patent on movie cameras, and he controlled the film industry very closely. And that is until a few misfits and some creative geniuses moved out west and eventually created Hollywood. People around the world quickly fell in love with the magic of the moving image, and droves more people moved out west to be part of this new, glamorous, and exciting industry. Among those droves of aspiring actors, actresses, writers, and directors were also many of those who lived on the fringe of society. Many of them were occultists. Now, it's no secret, even today, that creative industries attract the fringes of society. And some actually find their place in the chaos of the film world, or the art world, or the fashion world. But then, of course, many others just remain on the fringes. But those too find another way in, or they conversely draw people out to the fringe with them. And as I noted, in 1920s Hollywood, many of those people either living on the fringes and alternatively drawing others out to the fringes with them. So a lot of those people on the fringes in Hollywood were the occultists, as I mentioned, the self-proclaimed mediums and spiritualists. And they became very popular with the fantastically wealthy film stars, the world-famous film stars. You know, people who at that time had fame that no one had ever seen before, that could be mobbed on a street in Italy, as once happened to Joan Crawford, who also famously would frequent mediums and spiritualists. Now, ironically, Harry Houdini, who spent a good portion of his adult life debunking these self-proclaimed spiritualists and mediums, has the seance room at the Magic Castle named after him, but more on that later. So this continued through the 1920s and the 30s and up until the beginning of the Second World War. After the Second World War, this attraction to the occult certainly took a darker turn in Hollywood. Satanism started to rise up, and by the 1950s was fairly widespread. So was the aforementioned Thomas Glover a practicing Satanist, or did he allow Satanist rituals to take place in the mansion? Satanic rituals taking place in the cellar of the mansion open up a doorway to evil spirits? Oh, I mean, it sounds preposterous. And of course, as I mentioned, the hauntings, or the alleged hauntings, predate any involvement of Thomas Glover with the mansion. However, there is no doubt we have many celebrities at the time, through the 1950s, 60s, and into the 70s, that were open Satanists. There was even a celebrated Church of Satan in Hollywood starting in the early 1960s. At any rate, in 1961, the history of the Magic Castle comes out of the shadows. That's the year that Milton Bill Larson made a deal with Thomas Glover to lease the mansion, restore it to the best of their ability, and their idea was to create a private club for the Academy of Magical Arts. They were, of course, magicians. Larson hadn't intended originally to open the castle up to the public as an entertainment center, but they did in 1963. In fact, that's the first time the Magic Castle opened its doors, period, to anybody, private or public. And it was popular at the time. Don't forget, this was at the heyday of the nightclub, the dinner club, and a grand, restored, rambling chateau in the Hollywood Hills that hosted magicians from all over the world had a great attraction to 1960s Hollywood. Rumors of the mansion being haunted and stories and anecdotes about the hauntings never ended. In fact, if anything, they increased. Now, some people thought it was all in good fun, but others were truly horrified. Patrons claiming they felt uneasy just being in the mansion. And one young woman ran screaming from the mansion, leaving her date stunned, standing at the bar. She later claimed that she saw a demon standing behind the bar. This sounds far-fetched, but her reaction can't be denied. Okay, so let's first do a roundup of the ghosts in the Magic Castle that we do know about. Most famously, there's Irma, the ghostly piano player. You can go up to the piano in the main lounge and ask Irma politely to play any song, and she will faithfully recite it for you. Before you dismiss Irma as a trick of clever computer technology, it should be noted that Irma has been a fixture of the Magic Castle since it opened in 1963, a time when the only computers that were capable of storing that much memory to know just about every single song on Earth were huge mainframe IBM computers or Cray computers that cost millions of dollars and were only possessed by huge corporations or the Pentagon. That we know about in residence is Dai Vernon, who was magician in residence at the Magic Castle from '64 until his death in 1992. Rumor has it that if you go into the main theater and sit by what was known to be his favorite seat in the theater and ask him to do a trick, you will get a ghostly response. I won't give away what the ghostly response is. You'll have to go there and try it for yourself. Then there is Lauren Tate, a longtime bartender at the Magic Castle, who sadly passed away many years ago. But he worked at the castle's Hat and Hair Pub, one of the smaller bars within the Magic Castle. And apparently, his ghostly image can still be seen serving drinks. Finally, there's the Haunted Cellar. The Magic Castle actually calls it the Haunted Cellar, where the ghostly image of a little girl can be seen running up and down the hallway. This, as you'll remember, is where reportedly the unnamed or the unidentified Tish made her disappearance, allegedly. Perhaps the little girl isn't a little girl. Perhaps it's Tish, and her ghostly image just hasn't been properly identified. But there is also the rumor that the ghost of Harry Houdini also haunts the Magic Castle. Houdini never visited the Magic Castle. He died in 1926. But there is a connection to Houdini and his estate. William Larson, father of Bill and Milt, was also a magician, but he was also, by training, a lawyer, and he looked after the affairs of Houdini. So the Larsons, for many years, accumulated a great deal of Houdini memorabilia, which they proudly display in the Magic Castle. Some people feel that Houdini, a debunker of spiritualists and mediums, may haunt the Magic Castle almost as maybe not revenge, but perhaps his own practical joke, or his last trick, so to speak. It still leaves open the question of what exactly, or who exactly, haunts the cellar of the Magic Castle. What went on there between 1955 and 1961? Was it an insane asylum for those 6 years? It seems a strange location for seriously mentally ill people. A decaying, decrepit, rambling old mansion, doesn't it? And Was the alternative so bad that that is the excuse that Glover uses to cover up what was really going on there? Well, I guess we'll never really know one way or the other. All we do know is that between roughly 1921 and 1961, a lot of strange things happened at what is now known as the Magic Castle, especially between 1947 and 1961, when the mansion was sporadically inhabited, when it was left to decay, and those people who did reside in the mansion constantly reported strange goings-on. And then, of course, there is the disappearance of Tish, the struggling actress who, according to Rollins Jr., was actually behind the whole haunted noises and ghostly apparitions. How she could possibly have accomplished any of this is anyone's guess. And why she disappeared unexplainedly is also anyone's guess. Folks, that's going to do it for this episode of Haunted Places. This is just a taste of things to come. Magic Castle is, of course, still a very popular destination. As we have in store for you in the rest of this series are, well, let's just say, not quite so welcoming. So, until next time, this has been Circus Maximus' presentation of the Haunted Places podcast. Thank you, and good night. Sleep well.